welcome to Metal Base Monday. This is going to be a regular, every Monday episode for the channel. What I'm basically going to do is obviously just talk all things metal bass, but just kind of use it as a place to address questions I get on the other videos, talk about the industry in general, talk about maybe some technique, things like that. Just a place where I can talk a little longer and in a more expansive format about some things that I usually get caught up trying to address in the comments section of some of the other videos, or just bring some stuff to your attention I think is important, or just talk metal bass because that's what the channel's here for. Oh, and also drink a lot of coffee. But, so, with that out of the way, let's talk about subject number one, and that's going to be this year's NAMM show. I have one thing that struck me the strongest during the NAMM show, and I think it's the biggest takeaway. And that really is that the industry has just reached a point where we have an embarrassment of riches. Getting good sound and having good gear has just never been easier or less expensive. I'm looking at everything from basses to amps to software. I mean, one thing that struck me like right off the bat is Tech21 just put out a new version of the Geddy Lee pedal, the signature pedal. And you can have access to all the tools basically in the rig this guy's been using for ages. And it's like, for how many decades did players like him drag around these massive, just, humongous amp rigs that cost thousands and thousands of dollars? And you can have all these same tools inside of a box that sits on a pedal board for a couple $100. It's really insane. And I mean, you've got, for recording and software, you got people like Joey Sturgis Tones putting out these amazing, metal focused kind of softwares and gears and things that just give you a sound so quickly that I really think I'm going to have to reverse an opinion I had before. Where I had talked before about how people were getting too charmed by production, and a lot of crap was being slid through because of it. Because of slick production and a huge sound that's like this candy bar for the ears, we're missing out on great songs and phenomenal playing just because maybe they didn't have the same budget or they weren't as good at this massive production. I got to kind of do a 180 on that at this point, because it's become so easy to get a good sound anymore, so cheap, and the minimal effort it takes to find this gear, because it's just everywhere at this point, that if you're not putting in the basic, of course, 10 minutes anymore it takes to get a good sound or to get the right gear or something like that, it's really kind of a strike against you, because I think it shows at this point that you just don't care that much, that you're just not trying. It's just too easy. Whereas before, the production was what was getting bands by that had a bigger budget and could afford to do this type of stuff. And they were using that as a way to get over when their songs might not be that strong or their musicianship. Now I think it's going to go hand in hand, that if you don't have at least decent sounding production, it's going to be a disqualifier. And it kind of says, I don't care enough about my music. You shouldn't either. So I really, again, have to kind of reverse opinion on that and look at it through a new perspective, because we're really at a point of embarrassment of riches. There's just so many companies doing such amazing stuff at such a low price point. There's really just not an excuse anymore. And now there's also no excuse not to be out there practicing. That's the real deal at this point. Everybody can have good production. So I think we might see a really great swing back at this point, that it's going to matter your songwriting, because everybody has good production. Now the songwriting has to come back, the musicianship has to come back, the originality has to come back, because if everybody's got good production, then the only thing that's going to make you stand out is a great song, a great idea, and something truly different that sets you apart from the pack, not just being able to afford that great production. So I think it's a great time to be a recording artist, be a musician, or anybody who even just tinkers around. It's gotten so easy that I think talent is going to be the big definer again. And I'm glad to see it. And I really was struck by that by going to the NAMM show and seeing all this great gear. So this is a follow-up to a question I've been asked a few times and kind of ties into the NAMM gear thing, is fan fret bases. Uh, are they a gimmick? Do they serve a real purpose? That kind of thing. Short answer, yeah. It's not a gimmick. I've been kind of flirting on and off with the fan fret idea for about a year and a half now. Lately, it's become of more interest to me and everything. But over the past couple of months, I've gotten to sit down with them a lot more. And again, it's no gimmick. A couple of observations I've had about it that if you're looking to try one out or you're still not sure or anything, maybe some things to take into account. The extended scale really does make a humongous difference, and having it graduated from the bottom to the top. It feels more even when you play it, and there's just something a little more harmonically rich about the lower strings. And what I especially liked is it gave me an option to use lighter gauge strings instead of the really heavy ones I might use for lower tunings, things like that, because of the extended scale, which kept my attack and definition a bit more clear. So that struck me right away, and that was something I'm really interested in exploring a little further. The other thing is that it doesn't take anywhere near the adjustment time I was expecting, and every time I've picked it up, it's become more and more familiar. One thing that really struck me and isn't something I've heard talked about that much is how it wasn't just kind of a nice advantage, but actually was a superior positioning for doing tapping, especially from the 12th fret up. Now, what I mean by that is if you look at the fan frets on the neck, the top ones lean towards this direction and the others lean this way. If you're doing work up here, your hand naturally sets at this angle, which is the way those frets are moving. With my normal standard kind of fret layout, I have to turn my wrist this way to play straight up and down. Whereas with the fan frets, my hand's at the position that's most relaxed and gives me a straight across attack. That was really interesting to me. I was able to get more fluidity, a little bit more speed, and I didn't have to push quite as hard compensating for this angle. It wasn't something that would make or break, say, a certain passage I was doing if I was doing it on a standard bass, but it definitely made it more relaxed and easier. The other thing is it allowed me to not have to adjust my bass quite as much when I'm playing those upper passages. A lot of times I have to turn it a little bit this way to kind of get this easier access and better angle with this hand when I'm doing tapping or things high up on the neck, whereas with the fan fret, I could drop my bass a little bit and be a bit more relaxed because my hand was already in that position and was moving at an angle where it was more intuitive and relaxed, and I wasn't having to compensate for that wrist angle. So that was a big bonus. So I definitely don't think it's a gimmick. I don't think it's going to replace by any means standard fretting, but I think as this goes on, it's going to be an option that's added in, and more builders will probably start adding this in as an A or B, or I could definitely see it being a standard option. Like you can get a certain model bass standard, then 35 scale, then fan fret, or kind of as a 3 versions of the same instrument, because I could see it becoming popular enough, especially with a number of players, especially ones looking for easier wrist ergonomics and things like that. So definitely not a gimmick. If you're about to buy a new bass, it is something I would look into. I wouldn't discount any bass that sounded great and played great by far just because it wasn't fan fret. And I wouldn't buy a lesser bass just because it was. But if I can get a great sounding bass that had it, it would definitely be a consideration for me. And the last thing is going to be something that's a follow-up to my lesson on 3-finger picking. A couple of times I've had people say that they wanted a little bit more expansion or some clarity about how I talked about breaking strict rotation. And what I mean by that is because if you go back and watch the video, the quick version is that I'm using a rotation that goes 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1 consistently. Now, you want to keep that pretty much going as much as possible, but there are places where technique can be a little less rigid and you can do things that aren't necessarily going to be exact in that rotation that are going to make sense though. And one of them that I do is I reach for octaves or cross string picking with this finger regardless of where it is in rotation. And what I mean by that is if I'm playing here on this string, that I'll reach with this finger to get that top note. Like if I'm doing an octave or something, I'm going to go like this, back and forth, just so you can see it a little better. That leaves a couple of options open. One is, again, it doesn't make sense to me trying to do this and then reach with whatever finger is current in the rotation. That just seems like a easy way to just destroy your wrist, really. But I'll break the rotation if I have to do a quick string skip because one, it's just an easier option, it's relaxed, and I can pretty much go as quick as I need to. The other is it sets a middle finger to either mute or hit additional notes if I want to, say a tap or something. So I've got a finger on each string that I'm dealing with. And the final is that it gives a way of being able to not have to think so much about what's moving around. And that to me is key. I always try and go for methodologies that are going to be intuitive and aren't going to constantly have me thinking about what am I supposed to be doing at one point. I can't imagine having to sit there and try and keep my rotation always going perfectly 3, 2, 1, and then whatever finger it is trying to bounce forward. Being able to switch into that is just much simpler, to jump with the ring finger and grab those top notes. And then if I'm going to play more up there, then I just move my hand into position and I'm up in that range. But if I have to bounce back and forth, I'll generally break rotation. And I think kind of the secondary lesson to be drawn from this is you want to learn and master a methodology. If not master, then get it to at least a high degree of proficiency, and then adapt it to your own physiology. There's a lot of different players who do things that seem strange or unorthodox that you're told are completely wrong, but for them it works somehow. Any proof you need of this is watch Marty Friedman play guitar at any time. His picking style, the fingers that he chooses for fretting, it's all bizarre, but it works for him. And this isn't an excuse to just abandon all methodologies or go rogue and just, whatever the hell you want, because you're probably going to wind up with a number of really bad habits. But it's kind of that old rule is you have to learn the rules so that you can break them. It's that you want to use that kind of 80-20 thing of 80% of the time you're learning a methodology because it's been proven to work and it gives the most efficient and best quality way of you getting your performance out. But that last piece is where you want to start modifying and do some stuff that just fits you, because everybody's body's different. You can't make a hard and fast rule about necessarily everything. I mean, I know people that their ring finger is as long as their middle finger. That's not me. For them, being able to do different rotations is going to be much easier than me because I would have to constantly pivot my hand back and forth to keep everything even. So that player might be able to do things in a completely different rotation that just makes total sense for their physiology, but isn't going to work for me. It could be the same thing with you. I mean, again, it can come down to finger strength. It can be length. It could be just, muscle tone or how your shoulder sits when you play because of your arm length. There's all these things of fine tuning you want to go through, but learn the method first and then explore. But don't be afraid to do that last exploration, because that may be the piece that pushes you out into where you can really shine at what you do or come up with options that are going to make your playing unique, because it's really hard for other players to imitate because it's something born of your physiology and not a lot of people are going to be able to copy it. So with that said, that's going to wrap up Metal Bass Monday. a lot of content coming out and a big format change for the channel this year, and I hope you'll join me on it. I've got a couple collaborations coming up. I've got new episodes of Metal Base Microscope coming up, a couple other new shows starting, a lot more gear review, and a couple things that are going to be a surprise, but lesson material especially, a lot more coming. So, thanks to everybody who subscribed so far. I've had a big jump in subscribers, and that's really been cool. And remember to hit subscribe and hit the bell. You know what you need to do. And leave comments down below. Let's keep the conversation going. I really enjoy the back and forth, and it gives me ideas for what to address next week and the following weeks to come. And I look forward to speaking with you. So I will see you next time.